this is from 2 days ago. I'll waive his appearance.
All right. Say versus Donaciano Romero. He is charged with failure to register. I'm going to enter a plea of not guilty. County Attorney, what is your bond recommendation?
State's recommending a $7,500 bond due to his prior criminal history as well as his recent release from prison.
Defense counsel?
Judge, we're asking that you follow pretrial services recommendation. The charges are nonviolent.
Mr. First, going to set a bond of $5,000. Legal Defender's Office is appointed to represent him. May 23rd, 2024 at 1:30 p.m. is his preliminary hearing. And then defense counsel, I don't know if you can waive his appearance, make a special appearance on his misdemeanor matter. I'm going to appoint counsel in the case. It's 2 counts of indecent exposure from yesterday's date also.
If I can, I will.
All right. State versus Donaciano Romero. The Pima County Public Defender is making a special appearance, waiving his presence. He's charged with 2 counts of indecent exposure. I'll enter pleas of not guilty, appoint counsel for him. I'm going to release him on this case. June 12th at 2 o'clock is his next court date in city court. And I'll note for the record that he's in custody on a felony matter. Thank you.
Did you say that you're appointing the city public defender for him?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
At the Pima County Jail, what is your full name, please?
Oh, my name is Pearline Marshani Denise Dixon.
All right. Looks like you had a warrant out of Marana for a criminal trespass charge. I'm going to quash the warrant, release you. June 12th at 10 a.m. is your next court date in Marana. Make sure you appear in court. You also had a warrant for your arrest at a justice court. It was for a theft charge. You have to appear in court. I'm going to quash the warrant, release you, give you a chance to appear there June 12th at 8:30 a.m. If you don't appear, a warrant. Oh, I see you are being held on a felony. Okay, so I'll note for both files that you have a felony. All right, thank you. You're excused.
Thank you so much, Judge.
You're excused. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll see you soon.
Okay.
What is your full name, sir?
Good morning, Your Honor. Good afternoon, should I say?
Yes. What is your full name?
Carlos Arturo Mejia.
All right. Looks like a petition to revoke your probation was filed in Tucson City Court on May 7th of this year. It states in a petition that you were placed on probation May 31st, 2023 for a domestic violence disorderly conduct charge. It was for 18 months you were on probation. It states that you violated probation by being charged with a new charge of a felony domestic violence, aggravated domestic violence charge, and failing to complete your domestic violence counseling. And you failed to make your monthly payments towards probation. I'm going to enter denial of all the allegations. Set your bond at $2,000 cash. City Public Defender's Office is appointed to represent you. May 29th at 1:30 p.m. is your next court date in City Court, and your City Public Defender will be in touch with you soon. Thank you.
Okay, that aggravated domestic violence thing, I wasn't even aware of that because my probation officer, being on probation, would have let me know, and she would have had me arrested a long time ago. So this is something like brand new to me, and I didn't violate my probation or nothing like that. I just, what happened,
You'll have to talk to your attorney about the situation.
Yeah, well, It's okay. Thank you, Your Honor, for putting the plea of not guilty. All that for me. Thank you. You have a good day.
You too. What is your full name, please?
Rice Redmond.
You're charged with 2 counts of unlawful transporting of unlawful aid aliens. I'm going to enter pleas of not guilty. Your bond is set at $2,000. Saul Huerta is your appointed counsel. Your next hearing date in justice court is going to be May 14th, tomorrow at 1:00 p.m. Your attorney will probably see you in court tomorrow. Thank you. You're excused. What is your full name, please?
Tyler James Abner.
Is there a public defender there, jail? Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Abner, you are charged with making a false report of terrorism and communication. I'm going to enter plea of not guilty. You do have a constitutional right to remain silent, to be represented by an attorney. There is an attorney who is seated next to you representing you for tonight's hearing. I'm going to hear first from the prosecutor's office regarding their bond recommendation, and then I'll hear from your attorney. County Attorney.
Judge, the state is recommending a bond of $7,500 due to the prior criminal convictions, 4 felonies for the defendant, the fact that he's pending additional felony charges, and the fact that up until recently, all of his charges were out of Phoenix, giving him a lack of community ties.
Defense counsel.
Judge, we're asking for a $2,000 bond for time credit. Pretrial does recommend his release, but given that he's in custody for other charges, we're asking for a $2,000 bond for time credit.
Mr. Abner, your bond is set at $7,500. Public Defender's Office is appointed to represent you. Your preliminary hearing is May 23rd at 1:30 p.m. Your attorney will be in touch with you. You're excused.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. That's fine.
What's that?
Yes, ma'am.
This is just for information.
All right, thank you.
Or is Abner go? One. Alright, I'm just gonna do that.
What is your full name, please?
Selena Thomasina Arzola.
You're charged with 2 separate counts of domestic violence disorderly conduct. I'm going to enter pleas of not guilty. I will release you. Do not commit any further acts of domestic violence. Your next court date is going to be in Green Valley Justice Court, May 16th at 8:30 a.m. Make sure you appear. If you do not, a warrant will issue for your arrest. You are excused. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Fine, yes, sir. I'll call you up here in a second. You, you're gonna have a seat in the chair. You go down and up. Hey, what's going around?
What is your full name, sir?
Michael Christopher Jordan.
Mr. Jordan, looks like you had a warrant for your arrest at a Eloy Pinal Justice Court for a drug paraphernalia charge. I'm going to quash the warrant. Sir, this case will always be pending until you resolve it. I'm going to give you a chance to be released and appear on your own in Coolidge, May 28th, 2024 at 9 a.m. Make sure you appear. You're excused.
Thank you so much.
What is your full name, please?
David Daniel Orona.
Mr. Orona, you had two separate cases. One case was a warrant for your arrest at Oro Valley City Court. It was for a driving on suspended license charge. I'm going to quash the warrant, release you. June 12th at 10:30 a.m. is your next court date in Oro Valley. You've got to make sure you appear. If not, another warrant's going to issue for your arrest. You also had a case out of Justice Court, new charge of domestic violence disorderly conduct ×2. I am going to enter pleas of not guilty. And hold on a second. Pretrial Services was recommending against your release, and it's because you have a pending domestic violence assault case in city court involving one of the victims in this case. So, sir, I'm going to give you a chance to appear, but you cannot pick up any new charges. No contact with Selena. Do you understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Can't call her. You can't text her. You can't see her. Stay away from her. I will release you. Your next court date's in Green Valley Justice Court, May 16th at 8:30 a.m. If you don't appear, a warrant will issue for your arrest. You are excused. Thank you.
Can I ask a question or?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
So my last domestic violence, I had got that dropped. They dropped the case for that
All
one.
right. So I don't know anything about those cases. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
What is your full name, please?
Diana Talamonte.
Ms. Talamonte, it looks like you had a Maricopa County Superior Court warrant for your arrest for unlawful possession of a dangerous drug. And let me see. I didn't see any sort of warrant request on this case. Oh, $1,500. They're asking that I set a bond. I'm going to quash the warrant. Defense counsel, any position regarding bond or no bond?
For the Maricopa County,
Yes.
we're asking for no bond and with the direction to go resolve the Maricopa County, or not no bond, that she's released to go resolve it in Maricopa County.
Looks like she has multiple failures to appear. Pretrial Services recommending against her release because she's been given several opportunities to appear. I'm going to set her bond at $1,000. And her review hearing here is going to be June 13th at 9 a.m. Ms. Talamonte, the Pima County Jail will contact Maricopa County Jail and let them know that you're in custody. If they want to pick you up, they may. If they don't pick you up, then you'll be released. You also have a new charges of shoplifting and drug paraphernalia. I'm going to enter pleas of not guilty. Your next court date's in South Tucson, May 28th at 10 a.m. And I'll let them know that you're in custody on a Maricopa County warrant. You're excused.
And Judge, when is the review hearing for the Maricopa County?
Let me see. June 13th at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Ma'am, so is the Maricopa gonna pick me up?
They should, yes. Thank you.
See that for
What is your full name, please?
Gabriel Sipai.
The CPI, you had a couple of cases in warrant status. One case was out of Justice Court for a shoplifting case. That goes back to July 13th of 2022. I'm going to quash the warrant. I'm going to release you on this case only. Your next court date is in Justice Court, June 12th, 2024 at 8:30 a.m. And also, you had several warrants for your arrest out of City Court for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cases in warrant status for
quite a few of them, and all of those methods have continued to work up until recently. But with the latest updates to Windows 23H2 and the upcoming 24H2, they've disabled pretty much all of them. Well, Kind of. There's still one that works, but you have to do it a little bit differently than you did before. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But first, I got to pay some bills. So check out today's sponsor. Is your copy of Windows 10 unactivated? Well, it doesn't have to be, because with today's sponsor, VIP SCD Key, you can get a valid Windows 10 license for under $20. Stop dealing with that stupid watermark on the desktop, the valid license for Windows 10. Also, with an activated copy of Windows 10, you can upgrade to Windows 11 for free. Just go to the link in the description below and pick up a valid Windows 10 license key. During checkout, use the code CYBERCPU for a 25% discount. Once you have your key, go to your activation settings in Windows 10 and click on the link that says Change Product Key. Enter the product key you just purchased and hit Activate. Now you don't have to deal with that stupid watermark that come with running an unactivated copy of Windows 10. Now, on with the video. So yeah, Microsoft decided to go and make my video outdated. I'm sure that wasn't their intention, but at least it gives me a chance to update it. I think the thing that upsets me the most is that my favorite method of just writing the local user account name into the Microsoft account box doesn't work anymore. That's unfortunate, because that was really easy. And even when I made the last video, I said that that one was probably going to be the one that stopped working first. However, it didn't. Microsoft let us use that workaround for at least a year, but unfortunately, it doesn't work anymore. In fact, pretty much all of the methods in my original video a year ago don't work anymore if followed exactly the way I did them in the other video. But luckily, one of them still works, but you have to do it a little bit differently. So let's jump on the computer and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, as you can see, we're in Windows 11 already here, but I'm going to be doing this from VirtualBox. I decided I'm going to do it from a virtual machine just to make it repeatable, because there's a couple different ways I'm going to show you how to do this. And I've also tested this in Windows 11 Home and Pro. And the Pro that I'm actually using is the 24H2. And this one has the new installer for Windows 11. And this should apply to once 24H2 comes out, because it's using its new installer. I'm pretty sure this is going to be, for the most part, what we see once it's finally released. However, the first way that I'm going to show you how to do this requires the network to be turned off. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the settings in my virtual machine, go down to network, and then just uncheck the network adapter. Now on yours, this is going to be different. You're actually going to have to unplug your network adapter. However, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I'm going to show you another way to be able to do the same thing with the network attached, but they're just slightly different from each other. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start our virtual machine here. And this should start with setup in progress. In fact, it's starting right at the last point in setup when it requires you to actually put in a Microsoft account. So it's going to take a minute for this to boot up and get into setup. And once it does, I'll go ahead and skip to it. Okay, here we are in Windows 11, the last stage of the Windows 11 setup. We're going to go ahead and pick whatever settings you would normally pick. I'm obviously going to pick the US settings because I'm in the US. We're going to skip the keyboard settings. And we're also going to skip installing a network driver, obviously, because we don't want our network installed. Now, what they're going to do is they're going to essentially force you to install a network driver in order to create a Microsoft account. But what we're going to do is we're going to hold Shift F10 to open up our command prompt. And then from here, we're going to type in OOBE / and there's no space here, just / bypass NRO. And then once you hit enter here, it's going to restart the system. And just go ahead and let it restart, and then we'll get back up to the point of where we have to set up our Microsoft account. And I'm going to skip up until we're back into setup, so you don't have to sit here and wait for it. Okay, so we're back in setup, and essentially you're going to have to answer all the same questions over again, but that's okay. So go ahead and go through these. Pick whatever you want to pick. Go ahead and skip the keyboard right here. And then all of a sudden we're back to the install network driver. But as you can see, we have a new link here that says, I don't have internet. So if you go ahead and click on that, it'll go through for a minute and it'll ask you for your local account name. So you can go ahead and type in a local account. You can type in a password if you want, hit next, and you can go ahead and finish the rest of the setup process just like you would normally. And you should log into Windows with a local account. So I recommend using this workaround with your Ethernet unplugged. However, if you, for whatever reason, can't disconnect your Ethernet, or you just don't want to, then let me show you how you can do the same thing with your network connected. Let's jump back on the computer. Okay, the beautiful thing about a virtual machine is that we don't have to wait for this to finish. We can just go ahead and power off the machine because we're going to go ahead and restore it with a snapshot anyway. We're going to go ahead and restore our snapshot. We don't need to make another snapshot. We're just going to restore that one. We're going to go into settings right here just to verify that the network is in fact turned on. Now, my network is set to NAT, but that doesn't matter. Whatever the network is set to should be just fine. And you're not going to be doing this from a virtual machine anyway. So now that we know that it's on, we're going to go ahead and start this. And this should bring us back to the very same point we were at before we did the last workaround. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to where we're in Windows setup so you don't have to sit here and wait for it to boot. Okay, and here we are back in Windows setup for, what, the third time I think now. So go ahead and answer your questions just like you would before. And once we get through, we're going to skip our keyboard layout. And then, of course, it's got to check for updates. And I may skip through some of these parts just to get us to where we're going so this video isn't 20 minutes long. Okay, so it wants us to name our device. We're going to go ahead and hit skip for now. And then the next screen, I think should be, okay, no, we want to set it up for personal use. Now, there are some workarounds that tell you to set it up for work and school. I don't recommend doing that. And the reason why is because it's going to configure your system as if it's on a domain. And since that's probably not the configuration you want, I recommend sticking with set for personal use. The workarounds that tell you to use it as a domain client are probably not the best route to go, but if that's the one that works for you, it's the one that works for you. But for this one, I recommend hitting setup for personal use and then go ahead and hit next. And at this point, of course, it wants you to sign into a Microsoft account, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and hit Shift F10. And then from our command prompt, we're going to type just like before, OOBE / bypass NRO and hit enter, and it's going to reboot the system. So it looks like we're going to have to go through setup one more time. And like before, I'll go ahead and skip to setup starting so you don't have to sit and wait for it to boot. Okay, so here we are back in setup. So once again, go ahead and answer these questions, the default of whatever you want to answer them. I'm going to go ahead and skip our keyboard layout. And then from here, it's got to check for updates again. And this might take a minute checking for updates just like it did before, and I'll probably skip over it. And again, I'm going to skip for now for naming the device. Okay, and just like before, I recommend setting it up for personal use and go ahead and hit next. And then obviously, well, this is exactly the same screen. So a lot of people are going to be faced with this and think that the bypass NRO workaround doesn't work anymore because it asks you for a Microsoft account again. However, that isn't the case. If you hit Shift F10 again, open up our command prompt, we're going to use another workaround, but we're going to use it in conjunction with the bypass NRO. And that's essentially going to be ipconfig / release. And what this will do is it'll actually release our IP address. It'll essentially kick us off the internet. It's kind of like unplugging your Ethernet adapter without actually unplugging it. And we can go ahead and close this, and then we can push the sign in button. And as you can see, boom, local account. It doesn't actually ask us to sign into a Microsoft account. So at this point, we can just type in our regular name. We can type in our password, go ahead and hit next, and then follow the prompts in order to get you to the point of logging into Windows. Now, it's going to take a minute to boot up, so I'll go ahead and skip ahead until Windows is booted up, and I'll show you the last step in this method. Okay, so as you can see, we are now officially in Windows 11 without having to sign up for a Microsoft account. However, the next step that I recommend doing is, as you can see right here, our Ethernet is freaking out because it's not connected and our icons aren't showing up because Windows can't finish setting up because we don't have a network. So the first thing that I would do once it boots up into Windows is just restart the system. Now, the reason you have to restart once setup is finished is because you used ipconfig to release your IP address. What you could do is simply open a command prompt and run ipconfig / renew to reconnect to your network, or you can just simply restart the system. Now, let's jump back on the system and I'll show you how to stop Windows from showing you the stupid nag screens every couple of days that want you to sign into a Microsoft account. Let's get it done. So just to confirm a couple things, I'm going to go ahead and hit start, go to settings. And then once settings opens, I'm going to click on system and I'm going to scroll all the way down to about. And as you can see in about, we are in fact running 24H2. So while we're here in settings, we're going to go ahead and click account And as you can see, we are in fact running a local account. But what we want to do is we want to disable the notifications that bug us every couple of days to sign up to a Microsoft account. So to do that, go ahead and click on System again here. And then from System, you want to scroll down to Notifications. And then from Notifications, go ahead and scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says Additional Settings. And when you click on that, you've got these 3 settings right here. Now, the one that shows you the nag screens is the middle one right here. You can just uncheck that one if you'd like the other stuff. However, I typically recommend unchecking all 3 of these. And in fact, typically, I actually uncheck all of these and turn notifications off completely. But that's up to you. The most important one is if you go down here, make sure you uncheck the suggest ways to get the most out of Windows and finish setting up the device. That will stop those stupid Microsoft nag screens from coming up all the time. So inevitably, there may come a time where this workaround doesn't work anymore either. However, not all hope is lost. Ultimately, more workarounds will be found, and we also have the greatest workaround of all, and that's Windows Update. A Microsoft account is only required when doing a fresh install of Windows 11. You can upgrade a version of Windows without having a Microsoft account. So ultimately, if this workaround doesn't work for you, you can always just install 22H2 and use the previous workarounds and then upgrade to 24H2 or 25H2 or whatever the current build of Windows is at the time you're watching this video. Now, for people with systems that are running S mode, that might be the only option for you, because unfortunately, if your system is running S mode, then you can't run the command prompt during setup by pushing Shift F10. However, the original workaround where you just type any random username and password into the Microsoft account screen does work on 22H2. Even with S mode enabled. So if you have a new system that's running S mode, I recommend just reloading Windows from the very beginning with 22H2 and then using the previous workarounds to get around the Microsoft account requirement. This will benefit you in a couple of ways. For one, reloading the system will get rid of all of the junk that comes on the system from the factory. But you can also use my workaround to disable S mode without having a Microsoft account, which can be found right here. Unfortunately, though, this workaround will only work if you're running an older build of Windows 11, but the nice thing is that you can always download an ISO and install an older build. But as always, you guys have a great day.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, all of you. In a few minutes, we'll begin our meeting of the Justice Department's Election Threats Task Force. We're meeting today for the same reason I launched this task force 3 years ago. We have seen a dangerous increase in violent threats against public servants, the ones who administer our elections. Those threats endanger our democracy itself. That is why over the past 3 years, we have accelerated our efforts to combat the increase in threats against election workers, officials, and volunteers that followed the 2020 election. Our Election Threats Task Force has secured the guilty plea of a man who threatened an election worker in Michigan. The defendant made vile threats, saying that the election worker deserved a, quote, throat to the knife. We secured a 3.5-year prison sentence for a man in Texas who threatened the lives of Arizona election officials and their children and advocated for a mass shooting of poll workers and election workers in precincts he believed had, quote, suspect results. We secured a 3.5-year prison sentence for a Massachusetts man for sending a bomb threat to an elections official in the Arizona Secretary of State's office. We secured a 2-year prison sentence for a man in Texas who threatened Georgia officials in the wake of the 2020 election, including threatening to, quote, put a bullet behind the ears of an election worker. And we secured a 2.5-year sentence in prison for an Iowa man who threatened to lynch an election official in Arizona. Each of these cases should serve as a warning. If you threaten to harm or kill an election worker, volunteer, or official, the Justice Department will find you, and we will hold you accountable. The public servants who administer our elections must be able to do their jobs without fearing for their safety or that of their families. We will aggressively investigate and prosecute those who threaten election workers. Protecting the right to vote was a founding purpose of the Justice Department. Today, fulfilling that charge means confronting the full range of threats to our elections. That includes continuing our work through this task force, our U.S. Attorney's offices, and our FBI offices across the country to investigate, disrupt, and combat unlawful threats against those who administer our elections. It includes the Civil Rights Division's essential work to enforce federal voting rights laws and to challenge discriminatory restrictions on access to the ballot. It includes the work of the Criminal Division's Public Integrity Section and our U.S. Attorney's offices to investigate and prosecute election crimes. And it includes our National Security Divisions and the FBI's work to protect our elections from national security threats, including malign foreign influence and cyber-enabled campaigns. The Justice Department recognizes the urgency of these threats, and we are prepared to confront them. We will continue to protect people's safety, and we will continue to protect our democracy. I want to close by expressing gratitude to the election workers across the country who ensure that the promise of our democracy is made real. I recognize that your work has become more difficult and dangerous these past few years. I also want to express my gratitude to the members of this task force and to its leader, John Keller, for your devotion to this critical mission. And I'm grateful, as always, to the brave men and women of the FBI for their work. And thank you also to the Postal Inspection Service and to the Department of Homeland Security, our partners in our efforts to protect elections and election workers. Together, we promise that the Justice Department will be relentless in defending the right to vote and in defending the safety of the public servants who make voting possible. I'd now like to ask the Deputy Attorney General to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, and good afternoon, everyone. The Department of Justice has no more important priority than keeping our communities safe, and that includes those who work to ensure we can exercise our basic rights, the most fundamental of which is the right to vote. It is, after all, the right that secures all our other rights. The Election Threats Task Force plays a key role in this mission, and it reflects the critical collaboration needed to combat threats to election officials. Together, you've all prosecuted a series of important and demanding cases, making clear that we will not tolerate threats to our democratic process and to the election workers who serve and safeguard it. A particularly disturbing trend across these cases is the way perpetrators use new technologies to mask their identities and communicate their threats. Not that long ago, when a criminal wanted to convey a threat, they only had a couple options: a pen and paper, maybe a telephone, later a text message or an email. But today, criminals use a range of anonymizing technologies, not just burner phones and social media, but onion routers, VoIP platforms, and overseas internet service providers. Now, this isn't just limited to threats to election workers. It extends to other crimes involving intimidation and hoaxes, like swatting. Now, some criminals may believe that these new technologies enable them to act with impunity, but they'd be wrong. Because as criminal tools get more sophisticated, so do our investigations. Working with experienced investigators at the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Postal Inspection Service, we're unmasking these criminals and holding them to account. Over the past several years, Our democratic process and the public servants who protect it have been under attack like never before as threats evolve and spread. Today, those threats are being supercharged by advanced technologies, the most disruptive of which is artificial intelligence, emboldening those threatening election workers and the integrity of our elections. These advanced tools are providing new avenues for bad actors to hide their identities and obscure sources of violent threats. They're providing new avenues to misinform and threaten voters through deepfakes, spreading altered video or cloned audio, impersonating trusted voices. And they're providing new avenues to recruit and radicalize with incendiary social media content that accelerates online hate and harassment. As these crimes mutate with technology, they may be easier to hide and cheaper to perpetrate, but they are still crimes. Let me be clear. Violent threats using AI are still violent threats. So, in these cases, where threat actors use advanced technology, like artificial intelligence, to make their crimes more dangerous and more impactful, the Department of Justice will seek enhanced sentences. Election workers are on the front lines of this threat-accelerated landscape, and the Election Threats Task Force will continue to hold accountable those who threaten these public servants, their families, and the functioning of our democratic process. As I stated when we launched this task force nearly 3 years ago, a threat to any election official, worker, or volunteer is at bottom a threat to our democracy. I know the Election Threats Task Force is adapting to these threats and will meet these challenges head on. Thank you all once again for your tremendous work to protect our democracy and to keep election workers safe. Now I'll turn it to the FBI Director.
Thanks, Lisa. I want to thank the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General for bringing this group together and for your leadership with the Election Threats Task Force. I also want to thank everyone here today for the important work you do to protect our elections. Election workers, many of whom are volunteers and all of whom are public servants, are the lifeblood of our elections. From the local officials and employees who administer elections to the poll workers who staff voting sites on Election Day, election workers play a critical role in ensuring all eligible citizens can freely exercise their fundamental right to vote, and they deserve our gratitude for that vital work. Unfortunately, too often, all across the country, election workers have instead faced threats in the run-up to and even after elections. So let me be clear, any threat of violence to an election official, volunteer, or staff is completely unacceptable and something the FBI takes very seriously. And we're committed to ensuring threats to election workers receive the swift and thorough response they deserve, whether that's through federal investigation and prosecution or a referral to our state and local partners. That commitment is reflected in the work of the Election Threats Task Force, where, working with our DOJ partners, we've recently secured more than a dozen convictions for threats specifically targeting election officials. The work the task force does builds on the efforts of election crime coordinators the FBI has had in place all across the country. For years, each of our 56 field offices has had election crimes coordinators, special agents and intelligence analysts who stand ready to field threats if they arise and coordinate a response. When it comes to protecting elections, partnership and preparedness are key. So our election crimes coordinators work closely not just with operational and intelligence personnel at FBI headquarters, but also with state and local election officials, local law enforcement, and our intelligence partners. We're helping build resilience by sharing threat information, trends, and best practices based on our nationwide perspective. We're taking steps now to prepare for the full range of potential election threats and ensuring lines of communication are open so we can share threat information quickly. And when it comes to threats of violence, even though state and local law enforcement are the lead when it comes to physical security, we're committed to vigorously investigating and pursuing violations of federal law and to making sure all calls and reports of threats get to the right place. The work election workers do to ensure our elections are free and fair could not be more important. And we're committed to doing our part to make sure they can do that work free from threats of violence or intimidation. Thank you.
Hope you're doing well. In today's project, I want to separate tin and lead metal from this solder wire. You may not find this process an economical way to get tin metal or even lead, but I'm just trying to do some chemistry and explore science. And this is about 52 grams of solder wire.
The label says that tin content of this solder wire is 63% by weight and the rest is lead metal. So I have decent amount of tin metal to start extraction process, which is about 31 grams of tin metal alloyed with lead. Refluxing carried out in order to dissolve solder wire. To start chemistry, 200 milliliters of hydrochloric acid seemed to be appropriate, and a few drops of nitric acid would be beneficial to accelerate tin metal oxidation. Every time after addition of nitric acid, solution would turn slightly yellow. That's due to the presence of stannic ion in the solution, which tends to convert to the hexachlorostannic acid. Since tin tetrachloride species is unstable at the elevated temperatures, as soon as the reaction rate increases, white crystals of lead chloride would precipitate. In order to redissolve this white precipitate, we need some extra hydrochloric acid to be added. At the point that there was no more solder wire to be dissolved in acid, solution turned bold yellow. That's due to the conversion of all stannous ion to stannic. Since we have extra oxidizing agent in the solution, which is nitric acid. When the solution of solder wire been completed and solution was still hot, I added some sulfuric acid in order to precipitate lead sulfate. Solution cooled off and refrigerated in order to get all crystals out. There we go, shiny crystals of lead sulfate at the bottom of beaker. Vacuum filtration done to collect all sulfate salt of lead to be processed. Tin metal solution placed on the hot plate to evaporate excess water a bit. To fix solution yellow color and reduce stannic ion back to the stannous, some aluminum powder added to the solution. This is the equation that aluminum involves in the reaction in order to reduce stannic ion to the stannous. First, aluminum reacts with stannic ion and converts it to the metallic tin, and afterwards tin metal reacts with excess stannic ion in the solution and reduces it back to the stannous ion. I just added way more than enough aluminum powder to the solution, and solution turned turbid a bit. To fix that, some activated carbon added to the solution and boiled for 5 minutes. To confirm conversion of stannic ion to stannous, gold testing solutions seem to be a good idea to give us better shot about process. And here is the good news. Solution is saturated with stannous ion. To catch all suspended carbon in the solution, it's been filtered through a big piece of cotton. Let's recover lead metal first. Since lead sulfate isn't water soluble, ammonium chloride solution would be beneficial. An addition of some acetic acid would speed up the process. Since lead bicarbonate is much easier for lead metal to be recovered from, lead would be recovered in a redox reaction which involves carbon as a reducing agent. Lead solution needed to become more expanded in order to be dissolved, so I transferred it to a bigger glassware. When the solution of lead sulfate been completed, solution pH adjusted around 6 with sodium hydroxide. Then some sodium bicarbonate added slowly in order to precipitate lead bicarbonate. Vacuum filtration performed to collect lead bicarbonate for the purpose of removing moisture. Subsequently, lead bicarbonate added to the arc furnace and mixed with some wheat flour as the carbon source. Then arc applied in order to provide heat for reaction between lead bicarbonate and carbon. And eventually molten lead poured into the tray. Afterward, to clean lead from dirt, it's been remelted. To start recovering tin through electrodeposition, I diluted tin solution to reduce acid strength, preventing tin oxidation. While solution pH still was quite acidic. Everything been set up and current been passed through the solution from the power supply which I made in previous video. Tin crystal started to grow dull color. It seems diluting tin solution was a bad idea. After dilution, it yielded growing a sponge mass of tin metal. Before dilution, I tested solution and sharp tin crystals grew successfully. I had to concentrate solution again. Solution being concentrated and electrodeposition started by lead cathode and graphite anode. I place lead cathode at the bottom of the cell, allowing crystals growing from the bottom to the top, prevent crystals from falling and losing connection. Otherwise, crystals would become tarnished. Crystals grew successfully, but tin wasn't growing long needles. I wondered it could be due to the formation of oxidizing agents in the solution followed by electrolysis. As you can see, I didn't use tin anode to keep yield isolated. I decided to add some ferrous sulfate as a reducing agent to eliminate oxidizing agent was forming in the solution. After addition of ferrous sulfate, crystals started growing longer, surprisingly. I let solution to run on 4 ampere for about 3 hours. Tin crystals was reached to the graphite anode and been short-circuit. So I had separated bigger mass of crystals earlier. I turned power supply off and I filtered solution to concentrate more, to be checked for presence of remaining tin dichloride. Vacuum distillation done in order to concentrate solution. And crystallization done in the freezer and the pure salt have been separated. The salt been tested after dissolving in hydrochloric acid with gold testing solution, and it wasn't what we were looking for. Probably that was aluminum chloride. Again, I concentrated filtrate and I added some pieces of aluminum foil to reduce all recoverable metal ion in the solution. At meantime, sodium bicarbonate added to reduce proton ion concentration, preventing metals redissolution. Recovered black powder added to a porcelain dish and placed on the hot plate. After a while it started reacting with air. This powder is probably iron powder from the ferrous sulfate that we use. There wasn't any valuable amount of tin metal in the solution to be recovered.
And eventually, as the result, we managed to recover about 5 grams of, exactly is 5 grams of lead metal. I really didn't expect that for an arc furnace to be capable to recover even as much as 5 grams of lead metal. That's pretty good for exploring science. And here is the crystals of tin metal, pure crystals, which been recovered through electrolysis. I dipped it in water immediately after washing to prevent oxidation, and it is roughly about 25 grams of tin metal being recovered from 50 grams of solder wire, and it's pretty good since total tin content of solder wire was predicted to be about 31 grams of tin metal per 50 grams of solder wire, but here is about 25 grams, which is pretty good. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Till next project, see you next time.
Today I will be extracting tin metal from solder wire. So over here I have solder wire. Solder contains 60% tin and 40% lead. So on basis of that, I am going to extract tin. I am taking 1 molar hydrochloric acid in a beaker. The solder wire is made the anode and a carbon rod is made the cathode. Now electrolysis is performed. After 15 minutes, a sponge is formed on the cathode. Now, after the sponge has grown bigger, I will harvest the crystals. I took out the crystals from the beaker and washed them with water. Then again put the cathode to get more crystals. The wire again and again broke, so I melted the waste solder and made it the anode. Now, after a few runs, a lot of metal powder is extracted. I tested it. It contained lead as well as tin. So now we have to purify this. The crystals were first washed with water and 1 molar hydrochloric acid. And the solution was decanted off. Now we will wash it with water. The powder was finally washed with some water and the solution was decanted off. 2 weeks ago, I posted a community tab on what kind of videos would you like to watch. So maximum votes have been received to extraction of chemicals, but only 13 votes have been received. So if you haven't voted, please go and vote. Since lead was also present with tin, I have to purify the powder.
A reckless attack. Well, breaking news, reaction has begun pouring in after reports that Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico was shot at after a government off-site meeting.
Hello and welcome to Verified Live. Let's start this hour with that breaking news that's been emerging in the last little while, because local media in Slovakia says the Prime Minister has been shot and injured in an incident in the last hour or so. Let me show you the pictures that have come into the BBC. They were taken in the immediate aftermath of this incident. And you can see there just the flurry of bodyguards in the moments after shots were fired. The Prime Minister was then rushed to hospital. The pictures also show a man being pinned to the floor and then arrested. Well, let's get the very latest. Let's speak to Sara Senazova, who's a freelance journalist based in Bratislava. And Sara, thank you for being with us. There must be great shock at this news.
Thank you for having me. Yes, indeed, this event sparked a huge wave of shock in Slovakia, both in terms of general population, but also with politicians who are obviously very shocked, and even the president has expressed her fear and her shock after this horrible event.
I want to just put back onto the screen the pictures of the immediate aftermath, because certainly these are moving pictures and you can see the emergency services getting into place, but the still pictures that we'll see in a second or two show just the immediate moments after. We're seeing a man apprehended, pinned to the floor, a flurry of activity, and then around the Prime Minister's car and motorcade, the efforts to get him first inside of the car and then rush him to hospital. What are you hearing about the whereabouts currently of the Prime Minister? Any sort of update in terms of his condition?
Yes, so I have been following breaking news on various Slovak news websites. What we are hearing right now is that Fico has been transported to a hospital in Banská Bystrica, which is a town in the center of Slovakia. There have been several sources that confirmed to Slovak newspapers, namely one of the biggest Slovak papers, Deník N, that in spite of the fact that Fico was injured in the abdomen and his foot and his arm, he should survive, and these injuries should not be life-threatening. However, there is a very recent post on Robert Fico's Facebook account that says that he still is in acute danger, and we will only know whether he will survive within the next few hours, depending on the treatment he will receive.
Sarah, let me just interrupt you, and apologies for that. I'll come back to you in a second or two, but I want to put onto the screen new video that has just come into us, and these are moving pictures, and you can see in those pictures the frantic efforts of those bodyguards, the security teams, actually getting the Prime Minister into that vehicle as the camera then spins off to show the man being detained and arrested. Any sort of update in terms of his condition?
Yes, so I have been following breaking news on various Slovak news websites. What we are hearing right now is that Fico has been transported to a hospital in Banská Bystrica, which is a town in the center of Slovakia. There have been several sources that confirmed to Slovak newspapers, namely one of the biggest Slovak papers, Deník N, that in spite of the fact that Fico was injured in the abdomen and his foot and his arm, he should survive, and these injuries should not be life-threatening. However, there is a very recent post on Robert Fico's Facebook account that says that he still is in acute danger, and we will only know whether he will survive within the next few hours, depending on the treatment he will receive.
Sarah, let me just interrupt you, and apologies for that. I'll come back to you in a second or two, but I want to put onto the screen new video that has just come into us, and these are moving pictures, and you can see in those pictures the frantic efforts of those bodyguards, the security teams, actually getting the Prime Minister into that vehicle as the camera then spins off to show the man being detained and arrested. But I want to put those pictures again on a loop because they are very, very dramatic pictures of the Prime Ministers. They literally are the moments after the shots are fired. Let me show you again. Here they are, and you can see him being just carried there. There were reports of bullet wounds to the abdomen, and that certainly would follow with just the position of the Prime Minister as he was.
Hey guys, and welcome back to How to Make Elements from Household Materials. And today's element is going to be tin. Now, tin is not actually used in tin cans anymore, as one might think based on the name, and it's not really found very many uses in its elemental form, at least not nowadays anymore. Tin foil is also made of aluminum, not tin. But some of the uses that tin does have is in LCD screens and stuff. There's a compound called indium tin oxide, a very thin coating on there, but that's not very much. The only really reasonable source of tin that you're going to find today, that I can think of at least, is going to be tin solder. Now, this solder contains both lead and tin, and possibly traces of silver, and has a very low melting point, as both tin and lead do, and it's used to make electrical connections and stuff, especially this fine solder, because you can also get pipe solder for work just as well. But this fine solder, as does finer, will hopefully dissolve faster. The one downside to electrical solder, and possibly some types of pipe solder, is that there's a flux on it so that it sticks and flows a bit easier. And that's found on the there's actually a core of the flux on the inside of here, and the little electrical connections and stuff, especially this fine solder, because you can also get pipe solder for work just as well. But this fine solder, as does finer, will hopefully dissolve faster. The one downside to electrical solder, and possibly some types of pipe solder, is that there's a flux on it so that it sticks and flows a bit easier. And that's found on the there's actually a core of the flux on the inside of here, and the little spool here does say rosin core. Nonetheless, I'm hoping that's not going to affect our reaction too much, but after doing a lot of digging and stuff, it turns out that, tin and lead are not easy things to separate. Hence why I don't think anyone has actually done it on YouTube, at least. Lead will dissolve in things like nitric acid, whereas tin won't, because it'll form the oxide and then passivate it, so no more will dissolve and stuff, and it's just a whole big mess. And there's not a lot of information on a huge amount of tin compounds, at least not online, through Wikipedia or anything. So I used my Merck Index, which is a big dictionary of a huge amount of chemicals, and it basically tells you everything about that specific chemical. It's extremely useful. And I looked up some tin compounds, and turns out that stannous acetate, tin acetate, can be produced by reacting tin metal with glacial acetic acid. So that's just high purity acetic acid with very little water in it, and we actually made some of that in a previous video, and we have it right here. And if you're wondering, acetic acid is just vinegar. Huge amount of tin compounds, at least not online, through Wikipedia or anything. So I used my Merck Index, which is a big dictionary of a huge amount of chemicals, and it basically tells you everything about that specific chemical. It's extremely useful. And I looked up some tin compounds, and turns out that stannous acetate, tin acetate, can be produced by reacting tin metal with glacial acetic acid. So that's just high purity acetic acid with very little water in it, and we actually made some of that in a previous video, and we have it right here. And if you're wondering, acetic acid is just vinegar. But you do definitely need some very concentrated stuff, which can be easily made from household materials. Anyhow, so the tin will dissolve in the glacial acetic acid to form stannous acetate, which is water-soluble. And then the lead will actually dissolve in acetic acid in the presence of concentrated hydrogen peroxide to form lead acetate, which is also water-soluble. All acetate salts are water-soluble except for silver acetate. Nonetheless, so what we're going to have to do is make a solution with our glacial acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. What the hydrogen peroxide should do is it should first oxidize our lead to lead oxide, which will then immediately react with the glacial acetic acid to form our lead acetate. Now, we have to be very, very careful because lead acetate is very, very poisonous, and glacial acetic acid can cause severe burns to your skin, your eyes, and your respiratory tract. Same with hydrogen peroxide. This is 35% concentrated here and very powerful. This I purchased in Korea because you can buy 500 milliliters of it for 50 cents in Korea at any drugstore. It's extremely cheap. If you're looking to buy it in Canada, you can go to some health food stores. I found this in Canada, 29% food grade hydrogen peroxide, and that will work just as well. But for this particular experiment, I'll be using this 35% concentration. Anyhow, so to begin, I think we'll probably measure out about 75 milliliters of glacial acetic acid into this Erlenmeyer flask here. We'll chop up several grams of this tin solder here, and add, let's say, 15 milliliters of this 35% hydrogen peroxide. I actually don't know really anything about this reaction. We're just guessing here because there's not much information on the dissolution of lead and tin. So we're going to be trying this. We'll see if it works. Hopefully it does work. After that, we'll work on separating the lead compound from the tin compounds after they're in solution. So I'll weigh out those things and measure everything out and add it to this Erlenmeyer flask. And then, of course, we're going to be refluxing outside. Now make sure when you open up your glacial acetic acid that your fume hood is on, or that you do it outside, as it is very, very potent and really does hurt your nose. Anyhow, I'll get everything ready, and then I'll meet you back. Okay, so I'm heating this up outside, and after adding the hydrogen peroxide and heating, it didn't look like a whole lot happened. I think a bit dissolved because the tin lead alloy became a bit shinier, but nothing really happened. So then I thought, concentrated nitric acid. We made this in a previous video, and this is fuming nitric acid, very, very highly concentrated, above 90%. Anyhow, and that would actually react with the lead, hopefully from lead nitrate. I tested before, it didn't react with the acetic acid, and I was hoping that it would help react with tin oxide produced, or like the acetic acid, because when the tin reacts with the nitric acid, it will produce tin oxide, which will hopefully react with the acetic acid to form our tin acetate. So in this way, I was hoping it would go into solution. And you can see the brownish color of nitrogen dioxide gas as the nitric acid is decomposing. We're just refluxing this acid mixture. And I added 10 milliliters of this 95% nitric acid here. And it seems to be going very well and everything. We're just slowly refluxing it, and hopefully everything's dissolving. It looks like it's dissolving, so this is a good sign. So let this hopefully finish up, and then I'll meet you back. Okay, so it's been refluxing for over an hour now, and from the looks of it, and when I lifted it up a bit and swirled it around, there's no more solid lead pieces in here. Everything has been more or less dissolved. Now the white color is most likely tin oxide, and any lead oxide that was produced should have hopefully reacted with the acetic acid to produce lead acetate. Or it could also have reacted with the nitric acid to produce lead nitrate. I'm not totally sure what all reaction has gone on here, because we have hydrogen peroxide, which is actually probably all decomposed by now, and we had acetic acid and nitric acid all in here. But the tin oxide looks like it's not reacting with acetic acid, and it could be the nitric acid that's preventing this. Not totally sure why that would be happening, but possibly. But it doesn't look like any more dissolving's happening or anything. So, now that everything's reflux like this for so long, and it appears that all the lead and tin from the solder is dissolved, I think I'll cool this down, and then vacuum filter it. And by vacuum filtering it, we should be able to separate off whatever white compound this appears to be. That should be the tin oxide, which we can then react with, hopefully, hydrochloric acid to form tin chloride, and then we can get our tin metal from there. And then, of course, the rest of the solution will need to be dealt with, because it contains toxic levels of lead in it. And lead is really highly toxic, especially lead nitrate, as it will be absorbed through your skin. It can cause lead poisoning. So gloves must be worn, a solution of sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, must be kept nearby when dealing with this, and you have to wear eyewear and just be really, really careful, and definitely don't dump any of this outside. Sodium bicarbonate will actually react with lead compounds to form lead bicarbonate, which is extremely insoluble, and thus it's not as much of a hazard. So if you get it on your hands, immediately dunk them in a sodium bicarbonate solution, so that, say, lead nitrate will react from lead bicarbonate, which won't cause nearly as much harm to you. Then wash your hands lots. Anyhow, that's basically some of the safety things with lead compounds. So I'll let this cool, I'll vacuum filter it, and I'll make sure to have gloves and all the safety gear on. So I'll do that, and then I'll meet you back. Okay, so what we actually did was we added another 35 grams of solder to this, because it looked like it dissolved pretty well the first time. And I let it reflux for another 2 hours, and I had to add another 10 milliliters of fuming nitric acid to finish dissolving everything. But it appears that all of the solder is dissolved, and we have a very thick precipitate of some sort of tin oxide in there, or what I think is tin oxide. It's also slightly yellow colored, and I believe lead oxide is also yellow, though theoretically this should react with either the acetic acid or the nitric acid to form a lead salt. But nonetheless, we're going to go ahead and cool this down now and filter it off. The yellow color and this orangish compound there is actually the flux that was inside of the solder, and this is just floated out. I believe most of it was oxidized by the nitric acid, but it still appears that at least some of it has not been oxidized. It could have also contributed to the overall yellow color. Nonetheless, in the purification of our tin, this will not matter a huge amount. So I'll go ahead, let this cool down, and then we'll vacuum filter the mixture. And be sure to wash it several times to remove any soluble lead nitrate or lead acetate salts, because we don't want those in our final product. And then it doesn't matter how many times we wash it, because we're actually going to be reacting with the lead solution with sodium bicarbonate. And almost all lead salts will precipitate out with sodium bicarbonate to form lead bicarbonate, which is extremely insoluble in water, and thus can be easily filtered off, separated, and then you can recover your lead from that. We definitely don't want to be dumping our soluble lead salts down the drain or outside for that matter. Anyhow, I'll filter all this off after it cools down, and I'll meet you back then. Okay, so lots of interesting stuff has happened in the past little bit. So everything was successfully filtered off, and the filtrate from our solution is right there. And I took a small little bit of it and added it into this beaker right here, and we have confirmed the presence of lead ions in the solution. So clearly some lead did dissolve into solution, either as lead nitrate or lead acetate, because when we diluted that to about 75 milliliters of some water, and then added a saturated solution of sodium bicarbonate, lead bicarbonate precipitated out, as we can clearly see. And lead bicarbonate is an extremely insoluble salt of lead, so it's very, very good for determining whether or not you have lead in solution. So we clearly have lead in solution, so clearly some did dissolve into that solution, which most likely means there's some tin which might also be present. But from what was left in the filter, I transferred into this large 1 liter beaker right over here. And if we take a closer look at that, you can see that it's off-white color, but pretty white. Now, I transferred it into this container here, this beaker, and diluted it with a bunch of water just to wash it, to remove any of the leftover, clearly lead-soluble salts that were in it. So I'm going to go ahead and filter this again, but it's important to note that a vacuum filtration will not, or doesn't seem to work very well for this, as it very quickly clogs up the filter and just doesn't proceed. So gravity filtration, while much slower, is far more efficient. So I would highly recommend to continue gravity filtration, but nonetheless, we'll take all of this and we'll try to filter it off again. This should hopefully contain less lead, and most of the lead should be in solution. And whenever you have a solution of lead, just add a saturated solution of sodium bicarbonate to it, an excess of it, to precipitate out any lead salts, because lead salts are highly toxic, and we definitely wouldn't want that going into the environment. Anyhow, so I'm going to do a few more tests and stuff. We'll definitely filter this, and I'll meet you back, and we'll try to separate the tin from this. Okay, so I just did something kind of interesting. So we took that filtered solution that was kind of yellow a moment ago, and we diluted it in a whole bunch of water, as you can see right here. And I was wearing gloves a moment ago. They just had stuff on them, so I took them off for the filming. Make sure you wear gloves always when you're dealing with these toxic lead solutions. Anyhow, but it was diluted, and what this is going to do is, A, leftover acetic acid, concentrated glacial acetic acid, reacts very slowly, surprisingly, with sodium bicarbonate, and B, it's fairly dense, and by diluting it like this, the acetic acid isn't dense, sorry, it's kind of viscous, but by diluting it like this, it becomes much more, less viscous, and because we have a larger volume, our lead salt that we precipitate will sink to the bottom, hopefully, faster. And as lead is a very heavy salt, the precipitate should fall to the bottom relatively rapidly. Anyhow, so we then mixed up a whole bunch of sodium bicarbonate solution, hopefully in excess, and we dumped it into this whole mixture here. Of course, slowly, because as it reacted with excess acetic acid, it produced lots of carbon dioxide. But that was left, and a bit of bubbling occurred, but it died down. And then you could very clearly see a white precipitate of lead bicarbonate, which is extremely insoluble in water. Anyhow, once this clears up a bit, we'll be able to add a bit more sodium bicarbonate solution, and if more precipitate forms, then we know we haven't reacted all the lead. If no more precipitate forms, then we know we've reacted all the lead. And once we've reacted all the lead out of solution, this solution should be pretty safe to dispose of, as all of our lead bicarbonate should be on the bottom. We can then take that and separate it out, and we'll use that to recover lead from. Okay, so an update on what's happening. All of our lead has pretty much fallen to the bottom there. We'll give that another half an hour to fully settle out. That only happened in probably about 10 minutes, so it does fall out very quickly. But we're going to make sure everything falls out before we decant off the upper layer. And that solution that we filtered from earlier, the one in the big tall beaker, you can see most of it's been filtering through gravity filtration, and the rest of it's in the beaker over there. And I've just placed it on the hot plate because the remnants of what's in the beaker have that kind of characteristic orange color of lead 2 oxide. So I think that might be lead 2 oxide. It also fell out of solution quite quickly. So I'm thinking that it might be a lead compound, not totally sure, but we're going to heat it up. And if it also contains tin, we're going to be trying to separate that. We'll see how it all goes. This is quite iffy. You know, tin chemistry hasn't been studied a whole lot very well from what I've tried to research and stuff. And it forms some interesting compounds, like tin reacts with sodium hydroxide from sodium stannate, not tin hydroxide or anything. So I'm not sure if displacing out a tin ion from a solution with a hydroxide would form tin hydroxide or sodium stannate. I really don't know. It's quite confusing, and tin just behaves kind of differently. We're going to try to precipitate everything out here and separate everything, but we'll see what we can do. We might have to use a solution over here to our right as our main source, as I'm pretty sure this does also, because it can definitely contain lead ions, I'm sure it contained tin ions also. But also, based on the amount of precipitate that we got on the bottom, it looks like there's not very much lead that was actually left in this here, so this precipitate here could also be tin oxide. It's kind of confusing. We'll figure everything out. Hopefully we'll be able to get some tin out of this though. So something interesting was just happening. I just turned off the heat and took it off for a moment because it was bubbling. The solid, it is now a solid. It's all been dried out and everything, but I believe it was decomposing. So all we could probably possibly have in here would be tin and lead ions. Now, based on previous knowledge, such as calcium acetate decomposes to calcium carbonate and acetone. Now, as I was heating this, I was smelling a very strong smell of acetic acid, which I was assuming was from leftover acetic acid from the reaction, but perhaps it was decomposing, because when I took this off, it was like bubbling, like a gas was escaping. I think we possibly had either lead or tin acetate. Now, I'm not totally sure what's happened here, but I think perhaps when we added the nitric acid to that reaction mixture, possibly prevented the lead or tin acetate from dissolving, or because we didn't have any other water in solution, the lead or tin acetate couldn't dissolve because there was no water for it to dissolve into. Although when we added the water to it, it should have theoretically dissolved, but very interesting. I'm not totally sure what compound we had, but something that was decomposing and releasing some sort of gas. Yeah, very, very bizarre. Nonetheless, I'm going to go put on a gas mask now, just because as it's decomposing and bubbling off that gas, it could be spewing up pieces of lead oxide, if this is lead oxide, which is very, very toxic. So yeah, I'll go do that. I'll continue what I'm doing and tell you what I do. It's very interesting what's happening. Okay, so we're going to try something a bit different here. Oh, by the way, just over in that solution over there, I've just struck a piece of zinc stripping there, and that should displace out any tin ions, if there is any in solution. And I just bought that tin metal from Home Hardware. You can buy it as zinc roofing strip in big long rolls. Anyhow, back over to here. So, after heating up our mixture there, and it was bubbling, releasing some sort of gas as it decomposed, I believe what happened is we had